Hello, and welcome to Generation AI, the podcast where we demystify artificial intelligence in the world of higher education. I'm your host, Artis Kadu, joined by my co-host, JC Bonilla. Hey, JC, you look nice and relaxed.
This is what happens after you spend 7 days in a mountain skiing and having a press, of cocktails at the end of the day. Just came back from Utah, artists, and the world does not stop after you take a vacation. So I just came back to 3,582 emails, 5,500 text messages, and the AR world just basically introducing technology over technology over technology, which I believe you're going to catch me up on today. So what has happened since I went skiing, my friend? Is that what we have planned today?
Yeah, it's exactly what we planned today. So this is going to be a catch-up and news episode. We got a lot to unpack today. It's been a whirlwind, like JC mentioned, in AI news. And what we're going to do is break it down. So we're going to keep you up to date with that, but also we're going to give you our kind of angles and tell you why this matters, right? And here's our plan. We're going to talk about three different distinct areas. We're going to talk about battle of the LLMs, large language models that were introduced over the past couple of weeks, and some of the advances there. We'll take a look at the open source models from Google, Gemma, Mistral. Plus, we got some news on Meta's highly anticipated Llama3 open source model as well.
So circa episode 7, where we introduced the battle of LLMs, and in a way that was retrospective. Today, you're telling us this is where he's heading and what has happened. Love it.
Exactly. On the next section, we're going to talk about some of the changes and some of the improvements. 2 weeks ago, we talked about Sora, our video generation model from OpenAI, but there's been some advancements and some accelerations in that area as well, where Alibaba introduced a new model called Emo that kind of takes synthetic video to a next level. Also, Pika Labs introduced lip syncing features, and we'll talk about that a little bit. And also Stable Diffusion image generation model. They introduced their newer model that's available right now. Amazing clarity and amazing quality. And then finally, the main event is going to be around Google's mishaps on Gemini and image generation. For some of us, we can call it the woke AI wars, but buckle up for this one because we're going to dive into the controversy that Google's image generation tool and this cultural battleground around bias. So we'll talk a lot about that today.
Love it.
All right. Before we get started, the other news that happened, and this was something that you brought to my attention, was ChatGPT has a little bit of a brain fart one night, and it started spewing some crazy output for a lot of users, and this made the news. However, it was fixed very quickly, but we can dive a little bit deeper on what happened there. Can you tell me a little bit about what you saw around ChatGPT?
Absolutely. And as I read this excerpt, please have a laugh with me because the way we're presenting this is the difference between a bias in training versus a software bug, right? This is a software bug. Things that technology does left and right. Tesla, Apple, everything, even Element has a technology, right? Everything is going to come and have a bug. And in this case, we're just going to go have a laugh and hoping that engineers come back and fix it as soon as possible. So what happened this week is that some of the prompts that ChatGPT was generating, they started going into Spanglish and this kind of gibberish type of thing. So in this case, I have an extract of someone who's asking, can you give me some type of gels, right, for, I guess, construction that I can get off the counter? And it says, of course, you can get soak of gel nails polish. Este is the most common type of the typical cuando hablas of gel nails. Literally, this is ChatGPT. It's like, if it's trained by me, it sounds like me. It sounds like me.
Yeah, I was going to say.
It's similar to traditional nail polish, pero provides a más long-lasting glossy finish, popular for both mani and pedis. What? So this is actually not construction. It's about manicures and pedis. Anyway, and it keeps on going. So what we saw is as the prediction of the word selection probably started going to different libraries and it started superimposing Spanish words where English words were supposed to be going.
Yeah, exactly.
Hilarious. We had a laugh, and I think within, an hour, the fun was cut off and ChatGPT was back to its normal awesomeness.
So what happened there, just from a technical perspective, on the inference, when you deploy these models, there are certain configurations, and one of the configurations were wrong on the inference servers, and it kind of resulted in this, in this gibberish kind of output, which was fixed very fast. All right. So continuing on our large language models and the models that we've been talking about in episode 7, we talked a lot about open source models, closed source models, but over the past 2 weeks, there's been a lot of advancements in that area. Google introduced a Gemma, which is an open source model. So Google now entered the open source space. They introduced Gemma, 2 billion and 7 billion parameters. And basically, each of these are pre-trained and instruction-tuned variants, which means you can run them on your own laptop. And these models are built from a lot of the research and technology that powers Gemini's models. So these are smaller models, but they're open source and they're developed by Google's DeepMind. So they run on your laptop. They're small and efficient. They're doing a lot of work to optimize them for NVIDIA hardware. So it means that now you can have the smaller models run a lot faster. And they're an alternative to Llama 2 for some of the open source as well.
There was a restructuring in Google after the BART launch. Remember when Google tried to respond to the OpenAI ChatGPT first version, right? And it didn't go well. It's two teams, as far as I remember, and it gets integrated. So what we're seeing right now, and this is, I guess, what I'm venting towards to, Google is going to have release after release. So Gemma, open source, and the things that we saw just 2 weeks ago, I think you presented us, hey, did you know that, there's Gemini, 1.5 Pro and whatnot?
1.5, yep.
It's unbelievable the speed that is coming. And it's naturally because two different research labs have gotten together. And the stuff that have been working on is just hitting us, but there's more to come. And it's really exciting that Google is getting into open source, competing with the Meta style of LLMs, but more and more and more to come there. These are the folks who actually, remember, they did the AlphaGo documentary, right? The first application of AI in deep learning. I think they used a lot of applications of reinforced learning that beat a professional Go player. And this is like 10 years ago, right? So this is the same team, but today, now we get to access that technology mainstream. So exciting stuff.
Yeah. The idea here is that Google wants a lot of the developers' mind share, and a lot of folks don't want to get locked into one ecosystem or another. They don't want to get locked into the OpenAI ecosystem. They don't want to get locked into the Google ecosystem. So open source and having access to that developer mindset is something that Google is doing here, which is great. And it's great for developers and companies and startups that are building on these large language models. Now they have more powerful models, more better tuned and aligned models that can be very, very fast. Speaking of startups, Mistral AI is the crown jewel of the EU, specifically French AI company. And one of the things that they're known for is putting out in the open source a lot of their models. A few months ago, they were competing with GPT-3, and they're doing a lot better. And there were alternatives to Llama 2 open source. What they did last week is they introduced a new model called Mistral Large. And why this is important is because it's the first model that was introduced that is better than Claude 2 and even Gemini Pro, and it gets very close to GPT-4 performance on some of these benchmarks. Mistral is fluent in a lot of different languages. It was built from the ground up to be multilingual on the prompting, on the fine tuning. So it handles English, French, Spanish, German, and Italian. So it's very, very proficient in those languages as well.
Artis and I speak all the languages. Artis doesn't have an accent. Maybe he does have a Brooklyn accent, but that's a different thing. What I wanted to do a play here is, why is this important? Because you can come and get Spanish output out of ChatGPT, right? As a bug or as a feature. But the difference between multilingual capabilities is the aspect of translating versus in context predicting on the natural language. So what I mean with that, if I come and I say, hey, where is the bathroom? Right? I don't have to translate that and immediately give you an answer because it's native language in my brain. But if you ask JC 50 years ago or whatever, right? So where's the bathroom? I literally have to grab word by word, translate it, contextualize in my language, produce the output, and then translate back. Not only requires more power, that there's many things that in semantics, style that get missed or translated the wrong way. So a native multilingual capability is gigantic. So good for the French-speaking, Spanish, German, and Italian-speaking countries because now you have a more native way to start doing this type of work.
Yeah, and where this becomes really interesting is not necessarily in the output that it's producing, but actually in the fine
In
tuning
the
and the
prompting,
instructions, the prompting, right?
of
So
course.
now you can prompt in these different languages and you don't have to do it in English, right? Which becomes really interesting. So the other thing that they introduced is Le Chat, which essentially
Les chats.
is a competitor to ChatGPT chat. So
Real name, Les chat?
that is it. That's Le Chat.
Come on, Mistral, be more creative.
That's the chatbot. It's available in beta right now and it's for free. Kind of has very similar functionalities to ChatGPT. But one of the things, it's actually multilingual. So its multilingual capabilities are a little bit better, and you can see that as well. So not only is this model closer to GPT-4, but actually the cost of producing those tokens is much lower than GPT-4.
This is expected, right?
Yeah.
We've seen this in the semiconductors industry, transistors war, what is called the Moore's law, right? That every output doubles in its capacity and it gets cheaper and whatnot. It's just that the speed in which it's happening is ridiculous. I think it was yearly, or the output is based on the new generation of semiconductors. This thing, it's happening within a week, and it's like really exponential, right? So it's really interesting that it's happening right now, and that's the pace of technology today. So not surprised.
Yeah, yeah. So the models are getting really good. The cost is going down. So we're now seeing this kind of acceleration of adoption as well. All right. So last model, but not least, Meta. Meta was the first ones to basically introduce open source. They introduced Llama 2, which is commercially available for people to take and use and do whatever they needed to do with it. They have signaled that they're producing and they're releasing Llama 3 in July. And there's a couple of things that are interesting about what the approach is there. But the first issue that a lot of folks were critiquing Meta for producing Llama 2 was that it was very cautious and it was very constrained. It wasn't able to do a lot of things. It was very, very constrained when you were talking about controversial topics or how to do certain things. It was basically blocking those out. So the intention there for Meta was they didn't want to deal with backlash. What's different in Llama 3, it's more open to answering difficult questions. Again, this is addressing that criticism from Llama 2. Llama 3 will understand multiple meanings of words better, such as differentiating between killing a car engine by turning it off and another interpretation of killing. So those nuances in language and how we use them every day are going to be much more nuanced in Llama, and they're going to understand those different use cases.
What do you think on open source? The company is going to come and say, this is a role of the community, right? This is a really good example. Like the word killing, it's so contextual to English, American English specifically, right? And I would argue that in my Spanish ESL mind, right, I would not say I'll kill the car. I'll turn off the car, because that's kind of how I would start talking. So anyway, where do you think this scales? Because content moderation, it's so difficult and expensive. So is this something that you think that the play is to give to the communities, or do you think that the brand will hold? Because adoption, it's all about safety, right? And it's a trade balance of scalability, cost, and whatnot. What would you do if you were Jean LeCun?
What Meta is doing is they are building these models in the open and the open source, but they're also incorporating them into a lot of their products. So they need these models to have that nuance because they're everywhere, right? They're in one of the largest social networks out there. So multilinguality and the nuances make a big difference when you're talking in comments. So the training data that they have actually has a lot of those nuances, which is amazing, right? So now they're able to kind of bring those together. So that's what I'm excited about, kind of bringing that social nuances or how we speak into these models so they're able to understand that better.
The global footprint is it's fascinating. I'm quickly looking at a stat. Artists in the world, do you know which one is the most common messaging app?
Maybe WhatsApp?
What's up? In the US, which one is the most used messaging app?
Well, I know this one. It's iMessage, probably.
No?
No. Huh.
iMessage is number 3. I just got the stats yesterday. The most used messaging app, it's Messenger by Facebook.
Ah, that's really interesting.
Right. And then iMessage, right? It's ranked number 2 in the US. Basically, what I just told you is, to Artis's point, Meta dominates worldwide, the US, right? All the technology for messaging, right? So deploying these internally is just a smart play, and then packaging it for the world via open source. I'm excited about what Meta is going to be doing with LLM. So thanks for that update, my friend.
Excellent. Let's move into our second segment. And last week we talked about Sora, which is the video generation model from OpenAI. It took the internet by storm and all the social channels by storm. Everybody's talking about it, even, folks who are not in tune with a lot of the advancements that are happening. And of course, it's one of the first text to video models that is able to produce coherent, really high quality video up to 60 seconds long.
Hmm.
Now, after that news, it seems like over the past 2 weeks, the acceleration on the video advancements have progressed incredibly. The first one that I wanted to talk about in here is Alibaba has unveiled what they call EMO, or Emote Portrait Alive, which is an interesting name for it. It's an audio to video diffusion model. So, what essentially, you can take a single image and an audio track, and from that, you can generate perfectly synced video of that person speaking or singing or rapping or whatever. And you see a lot of those videos going around the internet. I actually posted a whole bunch of them on my LinkedIn, where you have Leonardo DiCaprio, for example, rapping on his early images. And you have a lot of those examples out there. Fascinating because you can now bring historical figures to life, and these models are getting so good at that. What do you think, JC?
If we think about our Chinese speaking population around the world, right? What is it, like a third of the world speaks a language that is not romantic Latin based, right? So we are into the point that we had before about, multilingual capabilities is a must. So now I want to take it to the next level. Not only is multilingual, right, but the aspect of how characters and how we write in, Roman Latin letters versus simplified Chinese or traditional Chinese characters is a whole different world, right? I know a little bit about the aspect of mining text and how difficult it is to do encoding on, natural language processing, whether it's English or Mandarin. So that's just fascinating. So excited that technology comes from China that is actually pushing the envelope on how computer vision and this idea of how we start thinking about, rendering graphics, and it has Western styles.
Yep. Yep. Exactly.
Good for them. It pushes the technology, it pushes the Western world, but more importantly, it makes it global. So I'm so excited because now what I can say is that AI has a global competitive landscape as opposed to dominated by this part of the world. So happy, happy, happy.
My first reaction to this one is this is great because from an audio track and an image, now I can generate really great lip sync and video. But then, based on our episode 10, when we talk about deep fakes and synthetic media, like this is exactly a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks later. And now we have a model that you can do these deep fakes very easily. You can just take an image of somebody and you can reproduce. But not just that, but you can take historical figures and kind of represent them and have them talk.
Potentially, I can come back from my skiing vacation and I could post an Instagram of me skiing with Abraham Lincoln. Potentially, right? That's what this allows us to do, right?
Maybe you can read that gibberish chat GPT transcript or have Abraham Lincoln read that for you.
In Gettysburg, that'd be cool. Let's replace Gettysburg speech with gel in Spanish.
Exactly. All right. So, following that, if you are not aware of Pika Labs, the website is pika.art. Pika.art or Pika Labs, they have been producing commercial models and they're producing commercial products that you can actually do video generation. So, if you haven't played around with it, I would highly recommend. This is one of the main sites that is doing a lot of really interesting work, actually, commercial work that you can use today. And they introduced this week actually lip syncing for them as well. So now they have lip syncing to their video generation as well, which is great. What you can do is you can have text to video generation, you can have an image to video generation by prompting it, you can have a video to video, so you can transform one video to another. You can do things like modifying a region. If somebody is wearing something that is not appropriate, you can say, hey, change this region. I'm wearing a blue shirt, change it to a white shirt, or put a hat on this actor. So you can do that as well. Things like expanding the canvas. Sometimes you have a little video and you want to have a little bit more of it up or down. And then also extending the length of your video. Like if you're doing B rolls, for example, or you need something a little bit longer to kind of fit what you're saying, this is great for that as well. So this is something that you can use today. Pika Labs, Pika.art.
Here's an interesting application of Pika. This is happening as we speak. Last year, I'm running this online course for NYU where they asked me to record, right? And, it's going to be async. So the whole works of instructional designers and video production comes in. We recorded for 2 days, dozens of hours, right? There's some mistakes. They want me to update those type of things. You know what has to happen, artists? I got to go back. They have to bring the crew again. I have to mimic the shirt. It's a disaster and it's not going to look the same, right? And probably it's going to cost them thousands of dollars to reproduce. So at this point, this technology is so good that it allows a production from last year to be revamped, updated. So if you're in online learning or you have basically async videos, today you're able to update them a fraction of the cost with probably 10 times the quality and replicability, right? So really, really exciting and very good application for all the online learning and type of video recordings that have been done, again, instructional design.
Exactly. One of the things that comes to mind is location based videos or shoots around campus. We could get an office or a conference room. We try to light it really, really well, but it's just very drab. So, wouldn't it be really great to essentially put that person in a very different environment or change that environment or add the school's colors in the background and the mascot? So, we can do all of those things very easily now with these capabilities, and it's available through Pika as well. All right, we're going to jump to image generation because this is really important. We've been talking a lot about video, but image generation has come a long way as well. I'm a big fan of Midjourney. I use Midjourney all the time. Midjourney version 6 produces amazing, amazing photography and amazing imagery. I also use DALL-E 3 a lot. But essentially, with DALL-E 3, the reason why I use DALL-E 3 a lot is because it's integrated into ChatGPT, but also I can provide it a natural prompt and a natural description, and it's able to take that and recreate and produce a much more complex prompt for me that it's putting that image together. So there's this interpretability of what I'm trying to say, and it's expanding that prompt and producing an image. Now, Stability AI, or probably one of the ones that you guys have heard a lot about, is Stable Diffusion. So Stable Diffusion is these models, open source models that you can take and you can use and embed in other products. Stability AI is the company behind Stable Diffusion, and they just announced Stable Diffusion 3, which is their latest iteration of this text to image generation model. It's kind of currently in early preview and it's available for some users, but the images that it's producing are amazing. As I look at these, it's able to reproduce things like motion very well with very simple prompts that are very similar to DALL-E, right? So we don't have to know how to prompt it. You can just kind of describe the image in a very natural language, and then it's able to produce those. It's also able to do things like handling multi-subject prompts. So you can say, I want a car. You can describe the car, but also you can describe the character or the driver that's in that car as well. Before, it was very difficult to do this multi-subject prompts as well. With the Stable Diffusion, the images that are coming out around text and the spelling abilities are just incredible. So I'm really excited about this one. I can't wait to start testing it out. I test a lot of these models through Leonardo, which is essentially it's a service that you can subscribe to, and it lets you pick a lot of different models that are available for image generation. So as soon as this is available, I'm going to start playing around with it. Hey everyone, Artis here, founder and CEO of Element 451. I'm thrilled to invite you to the Engage Summit in Raleigh, June 25th and 26th. It's our annual gathering where AI and higher education come together in exciting ways. A lot of the sessions will focus on cutting edge AI that are reshaping student experience, they're enhancing staff productivity, and offering deep insights into your data. Imagine 2 days filled with hands on sessions, real success stories, and the chance to network with top minds in the field. You live with practical, transformative takeaways as you learn how AI can foster a more personalized, efficient approach from recruiting to student success and even to alumni engagement. Oh, and the best part? Engage Summit is incredibly affordable. Try discount code Enrollify50, that's Enrollify50, and you can register for just $99. So join me and many of my fellow Enrollify Network creators at Engage Summit this coming June. Learn more and register at engage.element451.com. We can't wait to see you there. Sure.
If you are a Carl Skelton who used to be a program director at NYU and you were a student of his many, many years ago, and you're basically thinking about curriculum development, what would you teach artists? I mean, this technology is moving so fast. I mean, I don't know what they told you back then. Was it, I don't know, Acrobat or Adobe? But today, shouldn't the profession just shift to this, ability to do image rendering with generative AI? Like, and this is also your sector. You're a computer engineer and a CEO, but you also come from the digital media, graphics, audio, the works. What would you teach, man? Like, would you just not change anything? Maybe that's an option and let this settle. And if you are an academic in digital media, like, what are you thinking as well, right? How would you change this?
Tools and techniques have changed drastically and they're kind of improving. So this is a whole
Overnight.
episode that we can yeah, exactly, that we can go into. Essentially, the ability for someone to have the output of 5, 6, 10 people today is so much more attainable than it was 6 months ago.
In half of the time, right?
In half of the time, exactly. So a single person can do the output of a lot of people that were necessary a couple of years ago in the creative media. So what we're going to see is essentially I would say the lone creator. I don't know if that's going to be available for a lot of us, but the lone creator where you're handling a lot of different things. And one thing that was really important when I was in that program, it was integrated digital media. That was the name of the program. So the notion even then was that you did not have to be a specialist in one sort of media or another. So there was video production, there was programming involved, there was synthetic media, there was audio production. So there was a lot of different kind of modalities and different types of training. So integrated media, it's essentially become reality now. So now if you're a producer, you are writing with ChatGPT, you're producing with 11 Labs with audio, you're doing video with Pika, you are doing images with Midjourney, and so on and so forth. So you are now able to do a lot of these things with this integrated tools a lot faster. All you need, I would say, is that vision and I would say the project management component or the editorial mindset. It's like you need to be able to think about this and how those pieces are going to come together. Like the craft is gone. I would say the craft is no longer necessary.
I know we need to move on, but just 30 more seconds on that. That's a really interesting point. The craft, it's changing. I don't know if it's gone in my head, artist, and it's just because I can produce beautiful images, that doesn't mean that I'm making the right image on brand and context. I know how to manage them in a team, cross-functional. There's all these type of things that the profession still needs, but definitely the tooling is just being vandalized, abused, and we introduce with new capabilities. As such, the craft evolves. So maybe that's an episode for the future, but I think it's really, really interesting. What else do you want to talk about?
We left it till the end because this is a topic that's really interesting, but it's also news that have entered the mainstream media. We're going to talk about how Google, when they released Gemini, they released a image generation feature, but the generation had issues which resulted in images that were not only historically inaccurate, but also offensive to some users. So when you ask it to depict historical figures, such as like, let's say, a German soldier in 1943 or US founding fathers, the AI produced images that were basically folks with brown skin and
So we're seeing a picture of what looks the typical portrait of George Washington, but his face, it's not the typical face of George Washington as we see it on portraits, a very dark skin kind of tending towards my line of sight, or even shifting him racially as a totally different profile, which you could say
correct.
you can intend to do that, but in this case, the algo was not proved to do it. It thought that's the right depiction of George Washington, right?
Correct. Yeah, exactly. So it depicted a black George Washington. Exactly. So the other part that was really interesting is they was overly cautious in their responses. It began refusing to answer certain prompts entirely, essentially misinterpreting the prompts as sensitive when they were really not. It's like it led the AI to either overcompensating by showing a range of people that it should not have shown, or being overly conservative and not generating specific images when prompted, such as refusing to create an image of a black person or a white person when asked. So it's like, hey, generate a black person or a white person. So this basically threw the internet for a loop. And, I have a timeline in here because this progressed very, very fast. And I want to go through this timeline very quickly. Gemini with image was introduced February 20th. And throughout that week, users on social media and X kind of began circulating these images of Gemini's historical depictions of people that were not accurate. February 22nd, Google announced that it was pausing the ability for Gemini to generate these images. February 26th, the head of Google DeepMind stated that the company hoped to bring Gemini back in the next couple of weeks. February 28th, the CEO of Google, Sundar Pichai, he sent an internal memo to employees vowing to make structural changes to address the issues found in Gemini's racially insensitive responses. So there's a lot of political backlash. Google on February 28th lost $90 billion in market capitalization, which is a huge amount, $90 billion because of this mishap, again, in releasing an AI that they thought were doing the right thing by reducing the bias. However, they introduced inadvertently more bias into the model as well.
It went from trading at $150 early February to a low of 137 by this aspect. It has not recovered. Incredible, incredible.
So, JC, I want to focus on two things around this, right? So, we can talk about how these models are being built, but I want the audience to, and I want you guys to understand how these things happen, right? Like, it's not necessarily that the model was trained the wrong way or
Not ill-intentioned type of thing.
correct. Exactly.
Yeah.
So there's just two things. Last week, we talked about training data and methods, which is very timely for this episode because now we understand like bias in training data. So when AI models like Gemini are trained on a vast data set, they're collected from the internet and they can contain historical and societal biases in those. So essentially, overrepresentation of white people, underrepresentation of other certain cultures. So essentially, the more data that you have of one particular group or another, those are biasing the models. And if the training data has an overrepresentation of these, the AI then learns to replicate those biases as well. So this is the area where we're trying to fix that. And how do you fix it? Like we talked about it last week, where you can fix it beforehand, where we're normalizing that data. And what's the technique called?
Balancing data sets, right? So
Balancing data sets. Yeah, exactly.
balancing data sets, oversampling,
Right.
undersampling, all that kind of stuff, right?
Right. But because of the large volume of data these models require, one of the techniques is actually fixing that in post production, so to speak. We call it in editing. We'll fix it in post, right? So in this case, what they've done is they essentially went back and they said, okay, because we know there's a bias in the model, we're going to give it fine tuning instructions afterwards to basically produce images and override certain components to say, make it more diverse. So, what they did in this case is that when you get asked to produce an image, try to make it more diverse. So, they're modifying the prompt that the user is giving them underneath in order to transform it so it has a diversity component and an unbiasing component to that.
There's two things that we need to basically super clarify as the audience is trying to make this sense of what is a bias, right? Number one, as Art is saying, everybody, you could have more of white faces, right, than black faces. So the model is much better at producing white faces because that's what I've seen the most.
Right.
That's basically a bias in your data, right?
Exactly. An example of that is remember when we asked models in the beginning to say, give me an image of a doctor, and it was very, very generic.
A man who is white, right?
A white male, exactly. He produced white males.
Because it's what is seen most in training data.
Exactly.
Classical example was on the credit card business. Give credit cards to women, and guess what happened? gave women credit cards with higher interest rates because traditionally in the 50s and 60s and 80s, when all these models were trained, most of the banking accounts were dominated by the man and the woman was staying at home. So all of a sudden, like 20 years of history get passed as a bias. So that's one of the things, right? Now, bias diffusion is this idea that there's a bias, and if we don't change it with techniques that can be done, and we spoke about them, it just basically gets produced on the model, right? So bias data, it's not that it's a problem or it's bad or it's good, it's just knowing that there is bias, fixing it, because otherwise we have is bias diffusion, and the model recommendations, the inference will have that bias, and it's just basically a rolling index. So let me give you another example. If you look at cartography of the 1600s, it made the Western world bigger, right, than other parts of the world, right? Because we wanted to project that Americas or Europe were, bigger nations, and actually Africa or Asia, it's a bigger continent, it's a bigger type of, landmass. So cartographies actually made that trick. If you go multi-model and you train on, what is the size of the world? Imagine if you're super over-indexing on this type of cartography. You end up with a world that is underrepresented.
Correct.
But it was by design back then. And that's basically how biased recognition and managing or post-editing, it's fundamental.
The one issue that I think we're going to face is the balancing of that data. So these models are very, very hungry for data. So they need really large amounts of data. And when we have a very small percentage of that data, like we can't just eliminate the majority of it. We can't. So we have to do other techniques in order to kind of fix the output or normalize the output of these models afterwards. And that's exactly what Google is trying to do, is say, hey, we're going to fix it in post, and it's attempting to implement these technical fixes to reduce that bias, inadvertently led to this historical inaccuracy depiction when AI was prompted with specific historical context.
Over-engineered type of thing, right?
Exactly, exactly. Or they just didn't test it, right? They didn't test it enough. And this is something that, again, we go back to, this is the second time that Google has stumbled around this. They tried to go to market really fast with something, and their testing capabilities were just not there, or they just dropped the ball on it. So I'm not sure like how that got past product managers internally, but this goes back to that testing capability. But hopefully they're fixing this and they're coming back, and we'll have image generation in Gemini again. But we wanted to go a little bit deeper so you understand that this is not necessarily something that other models do not suffer from. It's just that Google's implementation and the fine tuning and the testing of it afterwards, they just dropped the ball on this a little bit, and they overcorrected for something that they should not have, or done better job at keeping that balance, so to speak. And they're paying the price for it for sure.
Yeah, of course, right. But I'm going on a tangent to give you an example of how I believe this is not a big deal. So stay with me. Car death fatalities. If you actually look at the amount of people who die on accidents on the road, majority of the incidents are human error, right? It's a drunk driver, someone who falls asleep, someone makes a mistake in driving, and then there's a fatality and someone dies. It's a big problem. But God forbid, one autonomous car kills a person. Oh my gosh, the backslash. And when you actually look at the amount of people who get hurt from technology versus human, it's overwhelmingly human. We're not forgiven with technology. So now technology does a bias, right? It gives you a map that it's basically smaller. Oh, it made Africa smaller. Here we are with colonization and things like that, knowing that for centuries we've been doing that humanly. So of course it's going to happen, because what this is happening is that technology is projecting our biases as humans, and we are defected individuals in a generation. We have so many issues. So what is happening here is not that technology is rogue or technology is crazy, is that it's projecting on our errors. But we're not very forgiving with technology. We put it at a different standard that we humans have even put ourselves. So of course it's important, but I just wanted to say, everybody, it's on us, not the technology.
That is absolutely correct. But as adopters of the technology, as builders and as stewards of this technology, it's on us to define the guardrails for how we deploy this. And the backlash for Google has been, hey, you are one of the leading companies who are putting these models in production and who are giving it to the masses. And you have a social responsibility to make these things. Of course, there's a legal responsibility as well, And that's where legislature will come in and put some of those guardrails. But we're looking at this from a technologist perspective. And for us, we care about the technology, we care about how it gets used, but we're not going to make a lot of comments on this show around all of that backlash that happened about Google being woke or, Elon Musk chiming in around Grok. So all of those pieces, we're going to leave those out for the pundits out there. However, we're going to focus on the technology and kind of the impact that it's making to our daily lives. And in this case, it actually is important because Google is one of the largest ed tech companies in the world. And as such, it's actually embedding a lot of these models in classroom technology and the tools that we're using. So, it has a responsibility to get this right because our kids are using these models to generate images and to learn stuff. If the bias is there, it's even more important for them to eliminate it because we don't need more of that.
You got it.
Well, again, I had a lot of fun on this one because I've been, posting a lot of these news articles as they come in on LinkedIn. So if you want to keep up to date, just follow me on LinkedIn and you're going to see a lot of the same content out there. We're going to try to be more timely, provide you both deep segments where we're going deep into how AI works, and then also bringing you what's happening in the market as well and what's happening out there so you can be up to speed and know exactly how to talk about this and contextualize it for you as well. So hit that follow button, give us a 5-star review, and until next time.
Thank you, artist, and thank you for catching me up. Bye, everybody.
Generation AI is part of the Enrollify podcast network. If you like this podcast, chances are you're going to like other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing weekly, and we've got a wide range of marketing, enrollment, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks, all designed to empower you to be a better higher ed professional. Our shows help higher ed leaders and professionals like you find their next big idea. They feature a selection of the industry's best as your hosts, like Jamie Hunt, Seth Odell, Jenny Lee Fowler, Brian Gross, and many of your favorite leaders in higher ed. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the next generation AI student engagement platform that's helping institutions all over the country create meaningful, personalized, and engaging connections with their prospects and students. Learn more at element451.com.